Good morning and hello, good afternoon and good evening to everyone who is joining us today. We have a lot of participants today for this section 6, air emissions in the Higg FEM verification trail. And I'm really looking forward to spending the next hour together with you. So welcome. My name is Karin Ekberg and I'm the CEO and founder of Leadership and Sustainability. And I will not go into too much detail about myself. I have previously been employed at adidas. I was responsible for developing the environmental strategy at adidas and implementing it as well. And I have a long experience in the sustainability area. I have also worked at Assa Abloy. That's a Swedish multinational corporation. And Assa Abloy is interesting from one perspective, and especially from the manufacturing perspective, because that company has today more than 100 factories that are producing their products. And at the time when I was responsible for sustainability at Assa Abloy, I had the privilege to spend a lot of time in their factories. And we worked on many different topics there. We phased out chlorinated solvents. We worked on reducing the use of hexavalent chromium and many other chemicals, but also, of course, with energy saving programs, water saving programs, etc. So that has been a really good experience that I can use also in my daily work, also as a Higg FEM chemical specialist verifier. All right, and the GoToWebinar, perhaps you are all familiar with it already, but let me just go through some of the details about the GoToWebinar features. First of all, you are all on mute in order to make sure that we have a really good audio quality. And I hope that you don't mind, but I will actually remove my own camera now as well in order to really make sure that we can get the best audio quality that we can get also for the recording for you. And then you are very welcome to send questions during the presentation. And we would like you to do that via the question function. And I will show you here. In the control panel, you can open up a window with questions here. And then you can enter the question and you send it off to us. And I will be seeing that question and can respond to it. And so please feel free to send it also throughout the presentation, and then we can respond to them. And also, I know that that is very important for all of you. You will receive this presentation and also the recording at the end of the webinar, either today or tomorrow or so. But in any case, you will receive it. So don't worry about that. Also, for your information, the materials that we are using, they are to a good extent copyrighted by Sustainable Apparel Coalition. Some slides are our own, and then they are copyrighted by ourselves. And now to the agenda for today. So the topic is air emissions, and we will also have time, as I mentioned, for questions and for discussion. And I will present our verifiers to you and our entire team as well. And we have in our previous webinars, in the first three webinars that we held in this series, we have also been talking about the verification trail and what the different steps are for the self-assessment, for selecting a verifying body and going through the verification. So if you would like to hear more about that, please feel free to go to one of our previous webinars and listen to the first 10 or 15 minutes of those webinars. And I'm also happy to say that I have one of my colleagues here with me today in the call, Julia Wolf, who has been supporting us over the past 2 years, actually with all our webinars that we are holding. So she has been preparing all these materials for us and has been doing a really, really great job. And I'm really very grateful to you, Julia, for all the help that you have been doing and supporting us with. So thanks a lot for that. And so let's go to air emissions. First of all, as you know, in nearly all sections, you have different applicability questions. And the applicability questions, they are there in order to make sure that you get the correct questions to respond to in the Higg FEM. And therefore, of course, it's very important that you do respond to those questions correctly. So please ensure the correct applicabilities. The operations equipment, those are generators, boilers, industrial ovens, air conditioning. And you will understand a bit later why we are dividing the different machineries and equipment accordingly. So you have the operations equipment, and then you have your processes and your substances, your printing, your drying, dyeing, etc. And then, of course, also you will be asked if you are monitoring your air emissions. And now we will differentiate between indoor and outdoor emissions. So the indoor emissions, they come, most of the time, they come from printing, from the adhesive processes, from spot cleaning, and such processes. And then the outdoor emissions usually come from fuel consumption, from spinning, dyeing, etc. And this is where you have a pipe that takes care of the emissions from these processes and leads it into the outside, into outdoor. So similarly to what you can see on this picture here. And now, here are some examples of some different processes that you might have, and the source and of the emissions, and then what type of pollutants you actually might have as well. So, for example, energy production. You may have emissions from your boilers, and very often you would have particulate matters. You might have nitrous oxide, you might have sulfur dioxide. And of course, the type of pollutants you have will differ depending on the type of the energy source that you are using. So are you using coal? You would probably have all of them. If you are using gas, you might not have particulate matters, for example. And so it really always depends. The pollutants, they depend on the type of the energy source that you have. Then we have, for example, coating, drying, curing. And here you might have emissions from high temperature ovens, for example. You might have volatile organic compounds. Sizing is another example where you have pollutants like nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxides, carbon monoxide, which is, as you know, a very toxic gas. Bleaching, if you are using, and it depends, of course, which type of bleaching components you are using or bleaching agents. So you might be using chlorine compounds, for example, and then you might have chlorine or chlorine dioxide in your emission. Or from your chemical storage, you may have emissions from storage tanks. And for example, you might have volatile organic compounds in your emissions. So those are just a few examples of the type of pollutants that you might have, depending on the process that you have in your factory. And now I want to give you an overview of all the questions in the air emission section. And you see here level 1, 2, and 3. And the air emission section is very special in that sense, because most questions are at level 1. So you have 5 questions there. And at level 2, you have only 1 question. And at level 3, you have only 1 question. So what does this mean for us? Well, at level 1, you have, as you know, you can get the maximum of 25 points. At level 2, you can get 50 points. At level 3, you can get another 25 points. So here, it is so important that you can move on from level 1, that you can manage all those questions at level 1 in order to be able to move on to levels 2 and 3 and be able to respond to those questions, so that you, in that case, if you can move on to levels 2 and 3, you can actually achieve more than 25 points. And now let me give you also the more information about the first question here. So the first question is, do you track your air emissions from operations? And then if you do, we are asking you to enter data for all your air emissions, and you should then select all the pollutants that may be associated with your specific emission source. And this question actually here does not include production processes. And there, the data, for example, that you are asked is the source, are there emissions from this source? Are you tracking it? Which pollutants do you have? Are they regulated by a permit? And if so, if they are regulated by a permit, are you in compliance with this permit as well? And in order to understand your emission situation when it comes to air emissions, we really encourage you to develop an inventory of all your air emissions. So all your machines and processes that produce air emissions, to put them into an inventory. Actually, I have to say, I very seldom see this during verifications, but it would be so helpful, because very often we have long conversations about which type of emissions you have, which machines, etc. And it's very difficult for the verifier to know exactly where you have the air emissions. Of course, we walk through the factory. It is possible for us to see to some extent, but it is difficult for us to know exactly how the piping is structured in your factory. So an air emission inventory table could look like this. And this is just an example, but what is important, you see here, you have all the emission sources listed. So for example, you have an emergency generator, you have another one, and then you have a steam boiler that is wood-fired as well. And perhaps in your case, you have several other emission sources as well. Perhaps you have a dyeing process, perhaps you have a printing process, and then you would add this as well. And then you can see here the pollutants that you emit, and then the concentrations, how you have determined them, if they have been measured or calculated. Do you have control devices in place? Are there regulations, any testing required, etc.? And if you do this in a systematic manner, I think that it would be a really good. I saw that microphone. Can you still hear me well? Now, yes. Okay, you might have lost me here, huh? Yes, I probably changed the microphone. Okay, good. Thank you so much. Okay, so I will repeat myself here regarding this inventory. So I really encourage you to develop such a simple table and add all the sources that you have for air emissions into this table. It will help you a lot for your own processes and for your own improvements, but it will also help the verifier during the verification. And then we also have the production processes. So do you track your air emissions from productions? And then you will again be asked the same questions as previous, as with question number one. So here, the emissions from the production process, they are most of the time, they are like fugitive emissions. And the other emissions from, for example, from here, from your operations, they are often point source emissions that go out via a chimney. All right. So then if you have an inventory, it would be great. You can upload it, of course, and then you should also have available any records and tests that you may have for your different pollutants and for your to prove also that you are in compliance with the regulation. All right, and then question number 3, refrigerants. Did your facility add additional refrigerants to any existing equipment during this reporting year? And then you will list the refrigerants, the quantity of the refrigerant added, the unit of measure, the tracking method, and the plan for fixing the leak. And this is, of course, you may not have had a leak, and in that case, you may not have needed to add any refrigerants. And then, of course, you can respond no here. But in every case where you have had a leak, where you have had to add refrigerants, then you need to respond with a yes here. And we also know that we have a global warming potential of those ozone depleting substances as well. So we can calculate because the problem is that you have carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas emission, but those refrigerants, they are very strong. They have a higher potential for carbon emissions than what carbon dioxide itself has. So the global warming potential, for example, of R22 is 1,500. So if you have, for example, 10 kilogram of R22 being released, then you would calculate it. You would calculate with 0.01 tons, which means that it is 10 kilogram. And you multiply it with 1,500 because the global warming potential is 1,500. And then your response is, or your result is 15 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So this means it's 15 times as much as 1 ton of CO2. All right, and then you should also make an inventory here. I can only recommend you always, we talked about that when we talked about data management as well, how important and how good it is if you can have a complete inventory and store your calculations and store your inventories in one place. And this is of course also the case here. So you should also identify and comply with all applicable laws, of course, related to ozone depleting substances. And if you need to phase them out, perhaps they are not allowed to use anymore, or in a certain period of time, they will not be allowed to use. So then you should make sure that you can phase them out in time. And then, of course, you also need to implement a regular maintenance program for ODS containing equipment. So that is for sure something that is important to do. And then when it comes to the refrigerants, you have probably seen that with previous questions, and we have had that in some of our previous webinars as well. There is additional guidance from SAC and from Sumera about how to report data. And so here we would like you to review source data against aggregated totals to ensure that it is accurate, to ensure that the most recent and updated versions of data tracking spreadsheets are being used and that all automated calculations are correct, and then ensure the proper units are reported and review any assumption. So make this test, ask yourself, does this make sense? Does this number really make sense to me? Is it actually relevant for my business, or may there be a calculation error in the numbers I give? And I have a question here. If I want to calculate the VOC emitted from spot remover used in a facility, where can I get the information from the SDS? Yes, you should be able to find information in the SDS about the concentration of the VOC. And if you know the concentration of the VOC in your spot remover, and you know how much of the spot remover you are using, then you should be able to calculate the VOC emitted. And then we have here another question. Should we also consider the refrigerant we added because we bought a new air conditioner, not because of the leak? If we're going to think about it, then what should we write down as the plan for the leak? No, I don't see that you should respond with yes here if you have bought a new air conditioner. This is a new machine that you have in your factory, yes, but you don't have a leak. And here in question 3, we are interested in the leaks. All right. In which section of this SDS should I look for the VOC content? Well, I cannot tell you just from the top of my head, but I'm sure that you are able, at the very beginning, the composition is given. So I don't know exactly which section it is, but it is one of the first sections where you can find the composition of the spot remover. And so there you should be able to see the concentration then. All right. Good. Thank you for those questions. And then also regarding the data reporting for the refrigerants, do not report data that is not accurate. So, which means, of course, you wouldn't do that anyway, but this means that you need to make sure that the data that you are reporting is really accurate. And then do not report estimated data if it's not supported by verifiable and reasonable accurate estimation. So please make a clear estimation. And even if you do it, you might also write down for yourself, why did I estimate this number, or why did I do this estimation, and how did I do it? And then the verification, and this is of course guidance for us verifiers. We should actually also be looking at the initial data collection processes and the data sources, the process and tools used to aggregate the data. And then if we see any errors or if we detect any errors together with you during the verification, we should correct that information and then of course make a comment in the verification data field, as with every response that we revise during the verification. So I hope that that is clear, and I hope that you take care and maintain your refrigerant devices and air conditioning devices, etc., in a good way so that you don't have any leaks. And then regarding the control devices. And here the question is, does your facility have control devices or abatement processes for on-site point source air emissions? If yes, select all sources of emissions that have abatement processes. So here we are looking at, for example, the fuel, the boilers, for example. So everything that has like a stack, you can see on the picture here, everything that emits to the outdoor via a stack. So, and this is what is meant with an on-site point source air emission. And then you should indicate the source, the control device, the frequency of monitoring, and we also have here the definition of a point source air emission. So it says airflow which is controlled in some way and released into the atmosphere from a single source, such as a stack. And I see we have one question here, so let me see. In level 1 question, do you track emission from your operations? The source are from stack, vent, and air conditioning. I already track emission from boiler stack, but can you explain how we track emission from vent and air conditioning? Yes, this is sometimes a bit confusing actually, because if you have a boiler, you will receive also in the table, in the pre-populated table, you will receive both stack and vent question. And I would respond to the vent question exactly the same way you respond to in the stack question. So I would just I would just repeat my response there. But air conditioning you get because you have said that you have air conditioning. So then you need to know, do I have air emissions from my air conditioning? And then you need to know how you are tracking it. Okay. And then the next question is the same question, but now for the production processes. So does your facility have control devices or abatement processes for on-site fugitive non-point source air emissions? And if yes, select all fugitive non-point sources of air emissions that have control devices or abatement processes. And then again, the same table basically, or a similar identical table will be pre-populated for you, where you can include your source, the control devices, the abatement process, frequency of monitoring, and here we also have the definition of non-point source or air or fugitive emissions. So this is really important, and that is something that SAC did for the module 2020. They divided between the operating processes and the production processes. And let us see, we have one more question here. How to calculate a VOC in the production floor? Well, first of all, actually, currently the Higg FEM is not asking you to report any numbers for your emissions anymore. Since the Higg FEM 2020, that question was removed, the actual calculations. But of course, for your own purposes, you do need to calculate. So how do you calculate the VOC in the production floor? Well, similarly to what we said about the spot remover, you need to know which chemicals am I using that have VOCs in them. And then you need to know which portion is the VOC. So is it 30% VOC, and which one in my specific chemical that I'm using. And then of course you need to know how much of this chemical am I using. And then you will be knowing, and in a certain period of time, and then you can calculate what is my emission of VOC in a certain period of time. Then if you want to calculate or estimate rather the concentrations, then you would need to know your volume of the room, and you would also need to know what type of airflow you have in your room. So if you have an air ventilation, for example, you would need to know how much air am I letting to flow through my room in a certain time period. So there are several steps in this calculation. And then regarding those control devices, so we have a few examples here of control devices. So for on-site air emissions, you may have, for example, a dust collector, and you see a picture of a dust collector here, where you then afterwards you have a stack with your emissions, you have some manufacturing process, or perhaps you have a boiler, and then you have a dust collector, and then the emissions are being going through and out of the stack. And you may have a bag filter, you may have wet scrubbers, and you may have, for the indoor air quality, you may have a fume hood. So in this case, you actually had a combination of a fume hood and a dust collector. And you may have solvent recovery. You may have also a local exhaust ventilation. Excuse me. So there are many different options that you might have. And of course, the type of control device you need depends on the type of emission you have. So, for example, wet scrubbers can take care of dust. Perhaps to some extent they can take care of solvents as well. It depends. And or for solvents, you may need something else, perhaps a filter with activated carbon, for example. So it really depends on the type of the emission and the pollutants that you have in your airflow. And I see that we have one more question here. Okay, that was just a thank you. All right, thank you. Good. And now, so those were questions 4 and 5. And with that, we have gone through all questions at level 1. I know that this section, the air emission section, is quite challenging for some factories. And especially if you don't have very significant air emissions, it might be difficult because perhaps you don't have all those control devices, so you are not able to respond yes or partial yes to all of those questions, question 1 to 5, and for all types of air emissions that you have. So it is sometimes challenging for some facilities to actually be able to move beyond level 1. And we are aware of that, and SAC is working on revising the Higg FEM, and then also the air section will be revised. But for now, we are living with this section, and we will do that, of course. So we just have to do our best here. And now, if we move on to level 2, then we get this question 6. Has your facility gone beyond permit requirements to achieve a higher level of air performance in nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, and particulate matters? And then if you want to be able to say yes here, you need to be below at least the level 1 levels here. And you can see, excuse me, SAC has defined 3 different levels. So if you are below at least the level 1 levels, then you can respond yes here. And after that, you will receive a question which level you have received. And you can see it's always, and it is depending on the type of boiler, for example, if you have a small boiler, a medium boiler, a large boiler. And then you have for particulate matter, sulfur oxide and nitrogen oxide, you have the different values for level 1, level 2, and level 3. So level 1 is the basic level, the foundational level, level 2 is strategic, level 3 is aspirational. So of course, level 3 is the best level you can reach. And now you can see which levels. If I want to be aspirational, I need to be, for example, for a small boiler, I need to be below 50 ppm. I need to be below 400 SO2 in milligram per cubic meter. I need to be below 200 NOx in milligram per cubic meter. So this is, excuse me, this is how it works. And I just want to give you also one example here. Don't I have this example here? It probably comes later. In that case, I will wait here and I will have a look at the question we have here. Control device, 100% remove air pollution. Please explain. If the question is, if you have to remove 100% of the air pollution, then my response is no. It is not required that your control device can remove 100%. That's very, very seldom the case that you can do that. Usually you have a certain rate of removal, but it's normally not 100%. And Higg FEM doesn't require you to remove 100% either. Of course, it should be as effective as possible. And in any case, you need to make sure that you can reach legal levels. But it is not necessary to remove 100%. All right. Okay. So let me just give you a few more examples here. So what can you do beyond using other installations, well, you can, for example, use a cleaner energy resource, natural gas, renewable energy, and you can have the air pollution control system, which we looked at a few previously. And then you can also have management approach, for example, by improving the efficiency of the conversion of fuel to electricity. For example, removal of sulfur from the coal before combustion. So you can, for example, if you can choose another type of coal with a lower level of sulfur in it, then you would, of course, also, if you have a lower level of sulfur in your coal, your sulfur oxide emissions will also be, excuse me, will also be reduced. All right, and so for example, for sulfur dioxide, you can have a flue gas desulfurization, for example, with scrubbing, dry or wet scrubbing. For NOx emissions, you can have a flue gas treatment, a catalytic filter, for example. And for particulate emissions, you can have a chimney, electrostatic precipitator, for example. You can have fabric filters, or you can have cyclones or multicyclones. You can have wet particulate scrubbers as well. So there are lots of different options you have, but of course, depending on the type of emission you have and the pollutants you have in your emissions. All right. And now I come to the example I wanted to talk about previously. So let's do a small exercise here. And you see here now we have just made a screenshot from the small boiler. And we have the PM-SO2 and NOx here, and we have the 3 different levels. And now I will give you some information. The facility's emission results are: particulate matter is 75 milligram per cubic meter. And the sulfur oxide is 1,200 milligram per cubic meter. And the NOx is 250 milligram per cubic meter. And now my question to you is, which level did the facility achieve? So if you would like to send the response in the question box, then I would be curious to see what you say about this situation here. Okay, I get a few different responses. Yeah. Actually, most of you respond correctly. And we got one very specific response, and that is that it is level 1 due to SO2. And that's perfect. That's correct. So it is level 1. And why is that? Well, with particulate matter, we were actually at level 2. With SO2, we were at level 1 because we were above 1,000, which would have been level 2, sorry. So we were at level 1. And with NOx, we were with 250, we were at level 2. So we were at level 2, 1, and level 2. And then you always need to take the lowest level. So in this case, it is the level 1, the foundational level. All right. And I see we have some more. Yes, it was the responses here. Okay, great. Thank you for that. And I have one more. Yeah, good. Well done. Now the next question, and this is now the last question, and this is already level 3. Do you have a process for implementing modernized equipment to reduce or eliminate air emissions and indoor quality issues at your facility? And this question is, for some facilities, it is really challenging because we know that in some cases where you have very minor air emissions, it might not really be realistic or defendable really to have a big process here to implement modernized equipment. But if you can think of something that you can do to improve your air emissions, then that would be really helpful for this question. So here you can, for example, replace equipment. You can substitute ODS with more environmentally friendly refrigerants. You can use cleaner fuel. You can also modify existing equipment, and you can optimize your abatement equipment. You can, in general, reduce your emissions. And here, it needs also to be a very specific plan. So during verification, we would really like to see your documentation about this as well. So please make sure that you have a really robust plan that we can verify as verifiers. And so this was actually the last question, but I think I would like to show you, give you a demo here. So let me just go to the Higg FEM, and here we go. We are now in the Higg FEM in the air emission section. And as you know, there is always, and I hope you can read this, I will make it a bit larger so that it's easier for you to read. So as always, there is an introduction section here, and you can see also again what we talked about, the difference between the facility operations and the production processes. So again, the facility operations, that is where you then have point source emissions via a stack, for example. And the production processes, this is where you often have fugitive emissions, so to say, inside the building. But of course, we saw that on one of the pictures. Sometimes perhaps you have a fume hood. So you are using VOCs, and then you have a fume hood that extracts the air and also then, of course, sucks in the VOCs, and then perhaps you have a stack to the outside. So in this case, you would have a stack as well. And then an overview of what the Higg what the air emission section asks you to do. And now we come to the applicability questions. So here, and you see here we have, for example, here responded, no, I will change that. I will now change that to that we have a boiler, a small boiler, that we have generators, that we have engines, that we have no ovens, no heating and ventilation, but refrigerant device, air conditioning. We have also other sources of known air emissions, and we have finishes and solvents as well. So you see in this case now spot cleaners too, sprayed chemicals, and we say that we monitor our air emissions. And now for the first question, the air emissions from operations, you will see that we get this pre-populated table. So always, depending on the applicabilities that you have marked further up, you will receive this pre-populated table. And then, so first of all, you say in general, yes, I track my air emissions. And now you have to respond for each and every source of air emission. You have to respond, are there emissions from this source? And since I have a boiler now, yes, I need to say yes. Of course, there will be air emissions, unless I have an electric boiler. But in this case, let's say I have an oil boiler. Okay, so I say that I have emissions. Do you track your emissions? What equipment is this emission linked to? And this is where the air emission inventory that I was talking about at the beginning of this webinar comes into play. Because if you have done a proper inventory, you will have, it will be so much easier for you to complete this table as well. Okay, so then you include you say that it's linked to the boilers. And then now we have to scroll over here. And then which pollutants do you have? And here, of course, now I need to say, yes, I have I do have particulate matters, I do have NOx, this oil also has some sulfur in it, so I do have SOx as well. And so I can select then which pollutants. Is this pollutant regulated by a government agency? Yes or no? And if the pollutant is regulated by a permit, is it in compliance with the permit? So yes. And if I say no here, I need to upload a plan here, the action plan, to make sure that I am in compliance again. And then we need to scroll even further to the right, and then you can upload a copy here, or if applicable, you can upload your emission test reports, and you can add additional comments as well. So please take care to complete these tables with as much information as possible, because you see there are only 5 questions at level 1, but they are quite comprehensive, because even the first question has this entire table that you need to complete. All right, and then the same question then, but now from your air emissions from productions. And here again, we will get a pre-populated table, because we said that we had finishes, we said that we had solvents, we said that we had spot cleaners, and that we were using spray chemicals as well. And the same is true then for this table. You need to complete each and every question here, and make sure that that table is really complete. Otherwise, there might be one place where you have responded no, and you don't have the information, and that might then hinder you from moving on to levels 2 and 3. Excuse me. And then we have the question about refrigerants. And here you can see we did say here that we added, and then refrigerants, so which means that we had a leak. And then we are asked, do you track it? And then we need to say how much, for which refrigerant, and how much we had. Okay, and then, so this was, in this case, we had several. And now we come to question number 4. Does your facility have control devices or abatement processes for on-site point source air emissions? And again, we get the pre-populated table. And then you have to respond here. Do you have control devices? Yes or no. So you respond yes or no to each and every question here. And then you have the question number 5 for on-site fugitive non-point source air emissions. And this table again, of course, is pre-populated. And in this case, you have seen that we have here responded that we have absorption with activated carbon in all cases, actually. And then what was the frequency of the monitoring? And we are free to add any additional comments if we want or not. And with the responses that we currently have here right now, we are able to move on to levels 2 and 3. So I hope that that explains a bit also what it looks like. And I cannot stress enough how important it is that you complete those tables really also comprehensively. All right, so back to our presentation. And here now we have come to our final slides for today. And do you have any additional questions for me? And I will start my camera again so you can see me again. Any additional questions from your side? This is your last chance. This is your last chance to ask additional questions now. No questions? Okay, all right. Good. Yes, there is one question here. What is your plan for fixing this leak? Yes, that is the question then, if you have had a leak in question 3 for refrigerants. And then here you need to explain what is my plan. So if you have a leak and you don't know where it is exactly, then you need to do investigations so that you can find where the leak is. But perhaps probably you already investigated and known, and then you can explain how you can fix this leak. And that is of course important. You shouldn't just fill up with more refrigerants without making sure that you fix that leak. And then there is one more question, but I don't understand it. Please explain major plan. Could you explain again what you mean with this question? I'm not sure I understand that question. If the gas is expired, how many days? I still don't understand your question. I'm sorry for that. Here's another question. I see from your Higg assessment that the emission from vent are from forklift and generator, but we don't have any. Can we just answer equipment related to vent is boiler? Yes, you can do that. You can do that. And you can also test it. Really, sometimes it's not really clear when you can move on to levels 2 and 3. It depends very much on the combination of your responses. So in this case, you might also test to say that you don't have any emissions from the vent. But then if you see that you are prohibited from moving on to levels 2 and 3, perhaps you can revise. So sometimes you might need to test a bit what works best, because that vent question comes automatically, although one would say that stack should be enough because you don't have one stack and one vent from your boiler usually. Okay. What is the global warming potential of R410, please? Sorry, I don't know that from the top of my head, but I'm sure if you Google it, you would be able to find that. Okay, good. Thank you so much for those questions. And now let me also move on here and show you. This is our verifiers here. So you can see in most countries we have verifiers, and oh, sorry, what is happening here? Something happened here. Huh. Suddenly an email. I clicked on one of the names here, of course. Okay, that's not so bad. So now you could, sorry for that. Now you can see how it works when you click on one of the names and then automatically one email will open up. All right, so back to the verifiers. I hope you can see the screen with the verifiers again. So this is our great team of verifiers. Many of them are chemical specialist verifiers. We have lots of chemical specialist verifiers in our team, so we can help you in most cases. You know that whenever you have reached levels 2 and 3 in the chemical section and you are using chemicals in production, then you need a chemical specialist verifier. And if you have a generalist verifier, you can still ask a chemical specialist verifier to verify your chemical section. So that is also allowed to do in combination. And also I wanted to mention also regarding the verification, if you are intending to publish your results of the verification, then it needs to be done on site. You can always publish on the platform, on the Higg platform, and share your module, your verified module. That you can do in any case. But if you want to publicly to put on your website, or if your brand is asking you to publish your verified results, in those cases you need to conduct or to have the verifier coming on site and doing an on-site verification for you. All right, and then that we have some more questions here. Yes, I have one question here, and this is unfortunately this is a case where it is not so easy to manage. So we have for our generator and boiler, there will be no control devices, but the emission values are very low. So if we choose no in control devices, then we will not reach level 1. And that's true. So you probably will not reach level 1 then, which means that you will not be able to move on to levels 2 and 3. So this is the unfortunate case where you have very insignificant emission values, and therefore you are not obliged, you are not required by regulation to have a control device. And in this case, it may be that you cannot move on from level 1, that you are stuck, so to say, at level 1. This is a problem that SAC is aware of, and that's also the reason why the air emission section will be revised completely in the next version. Yeah, so I'm sorry for that. There is not so much I can do about it. It's just the way how that module is structured, unfortunately. All right, good. And then let me also show you, here is the overview of all the webinars we have in this series about the Higg FEM. And you can see we have already done actually several of them. And I will add the recording for the water use here, and then you will receive, and the wastewater as well, and then you will receive via email. You will receive the recording and the slide deck from this session as well. And the next webinars is the waste and the chemical management section webinars, and they will be coming up in 2 weeks from now. And you can, when you receive this, you can then register here, or you can go to our website, to our blog post, or to the title for webinars and trainings, and there you can also register. And I see that we may have a final question here. Then please provide solution for current year. Yes, I'm sorry, there is no solution there, unfortunately. This is really a bit of a difficult situation, but there is no solution for this as far as I can see, unfortunately. Yeah. So, okay. And so if there are no further questions, I hope that you have enjoyed this webinar, that you have learned a few things, and I hope that you will go out and be really motivated to improve your Higg FEM performance. And please let me know if you have any further questions or any further ideas. And of course, also let us know if you would like to verify with us or if we can support you in any other way. And with that, I would like to wish you a really nice rest of your day, and have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.